صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك وعلى آل بيتك المظلومين الغر الميامين صلى الله عليك يا مولاي وابن مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة ويا عبرة كل مؤمن ومؤمنة غريب يا مظلوم كربلاء سيدي يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. For the well-being of the Savior of mankind, the awaited 12th Imam Al-Hujjat al-Hasan al-Askari recite aloud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. As we embark on this journey of transformation, it is, after all, why we're here. Because we've been told by none other than the ever-truthful messenger of mercy, the Prophet of Islam, that his grandson Hussein isn't a normal human being. We've been told by the Prophet that his grandson is the ark of salvation, the lantern of guidance. In fact, the Prophet says that I saw an inscription. Imagine, obviously the throne of God isn't a material object. It's not some big chair on which the Almighty Allah sits down. God's throne refers to something much deeper, much grander, much bigger in scale. It refers to God's knowledge, His eternal omnipotence. And so the Prophet of Islam says that when I ascended to the seventh heaven, I saw an inscription on the pillar of the throne of Allah that read, Inna al-Husayn misbahu hudan wa safinatu najah. Hussein is an ark, a ship of salvation, and a lantern of guidance. And so the idea, I would hope, is for all of us to get together and to find a way for us to board that ship, to find and seek our own salvation, to transform our lives for the better, to seek nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to relinquish the old, perhaps shameful habits that many of us struggle with from time to time, and to embrace the guidance of Aba Abdullah Hussein. The tradition states that heaven has 8 gates, hell has 7 gates. Heaven instead has 8. Each one of those gates is named after a righteous deed. For instance, Bab Salah, people who perfect their prayers get to enter through the gate of prayer. And each one, depending on their most pronounced characteristics, get to enter paradise through that specific gate. The hadith then says that the 8th gate of paradise is called Babul Hussein, and the people who enter through that gate and find their salvation in paradise through the gate of Hussein outnumber all of those who enter through the other 7 gates put together. And so the idea is to find the fastest, easiest, most convenient path into paradise. Isn't that what we all want? And of course, that path is that of Hussein. Now, before we embark on this journey, let's not sugarcoat it. It's not going to be a smooth journey. This is a rugged journey. It's going to have difficulties. You're going to get tested. That's the bottom line. If you think you're worthy of boarding the Ark of Hussein, the Ark of Salvation, then you need to pass a series of tests. Are there conditions? Are there restrictions? Are there prerequisites for people to take this journey and to board the Ark of Abdullah Hussein and to ultimately enter paradise? The answer is, of course there are. There are prerequisites to anything. And surely there are prerequisites for entering paradise. So what are they? Tonight, I want to draw your attention to 3 of those prerequisites. I'd like to talk about these as foundational conditions that we need to abide by if we're going to maximize the benefits of these gatherings and these majalis. So as we're about to begin this journey, let's try and set some ground rules, shall we? Rule number 1. Bear with me. I think some of these might be a little more difficult to digest than others, but I think ultimately we can all benefit from the words of the Ahlul Bayt, the words of Allah and His messengers, by simply opening up, by simply submitting to the fact that we are here to learn. Inshallah, we do not set any preconditions, and we embrace the truth as it comes our way. Condition number 1 is for us to have a sense of moderation in our lives, a sense of balance. Why do I say that? People who are characterized as youth, and most of you fall within that description. One of the quintessential characteristics of being youth and being a member of this demographic is that when you find something you enjoy, you are inclined to go to extreme lengths. What do I mean by that? Again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but what it means is, if we find something that we truly enjoy, you'll find that we are going to break the rules of what is reasonable and what is normal. Right? So we go to extremities. We do things with such valor, with such fervor, with such passion, that, again, we break the rules of moderation and balance. And again, like I said before, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, we are told in the traditions of the debate that if you're going to seek knowledge, and seeking knowledge, of course, is incumbent and it's obligatory upon every Muslim man or woman, right? It's a famous tradition by the Holy Prophet. But if you're going to seek knowledge, then what you need to do is start very early in life. Don't put it off. Don't wait until you're older, because the temptation is you put it off, have your fun, goof off as much as you can, and then whenever your life is a little more stable, maybe then I'll sit down and I'll learn a thing or two. However, traditions tell us, and there's a famous Arabic proverb which is actually taken from one of the traditions of Imam Ali, the commander of the faithful, in which he says, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فِي الصِّغَرِ كَالنَّقْشِ فِي الْحَجَرِ. When you seek knowledge at a young age, when you're youth, when you're young, then it's almost like sculpting a piece of rock. It's almost like engraving on stone. When you carve out stone and you engrave a writing, then that's permanent. That's not going to go away. That's there to stay forever. It's a beautiful description. And the Imam is the one who says this. Whereas if you wait until you're older, it's not so much a matter of your brain being different. You know, scientists, in fact, do suggest that older people can learn and memorize as well as any young person can. The problem is there are too many distractions. There are too many things pulling you from every side. And you have your commitments, and you have your family, and you've got work, and there's so many different things that occupy that space within your brain. And so it becomes increasingly difficult to memorize, increasingly difficult to learn. But more importantly than memorization and learning, it becomes increasingly difficult to submit to the truth. And that's something that as youth, you don't have that problem. As youth, your brain, your personality, your soul, if you like, isn't yet molded. It's not yet solid. And so it's open to new ideas. And as I said, that could be a very good thing if done within the confines of reason, if done within the limits of what our religion teaches us. So, being youthful is a great time to learn because you do it with such passion, right? Because you make it your prime focus to do a specific thing. The problem with that is that when you take things to extremes, when you do not practice moderation, when you don't have balance in your life, and you choose a sphere and just go all the way in it, as I said, you break the rules of moderation. You begin to become, quote-unquote, an extremist. Now, is there such a thing as too much of a good thing? And the answer is yes. Even good things have to be done within moderation. What I'm saying, basically, brothers and sisters, as we embark on this journey of self-transformation, inshallah, and spiritual perfection, is that you have to keep everything in moderation. So balance is an overarching principle that should apply across the board. It applies to almost everything. And I'll explain why I say almost. But basically, that's something that you have to keep in mind, right? There are many, many traditions from the Ahlul Bayt, for instance, that say that if you pick something, a good deed, a new habit that pleases Allah and His Messenger and His Apostles, right? If you do those, even if it's a little bit, but you do it consistently and you do it continually, then that is better than you doing something big, but you break down because you've overloaded the system, because you've crashed the system, right? The commander of the faithful, for instance, says, قَلِيلٌ تُدَاوِمُ عَلَيْهِ أَرْجَحْ مِنْ كَثِيرٍ مَمْلُولٍ مِنْهِ. If you take a new habit, you want to seek nearness to God? We all do, alhamdulillah, that's why we're here, fine. Don't start by lifting the heavier weights, right? I'm sure if you haven't been through that experience, I'm sure you know others who have. You sign up to the local gym, you get your membership, you pay the fee, you go in and you're all hyped up and you're trying to lose all that extra weight, or you're trying to gain all that muscle weight, or whatever it is your goal is, and you start, especially if you don't have a trainer to help you out in the early days, and you end up starting with, extremist activities. You start doing things that are not within the norms of what is reasonable, right? And so what happens after that? You get the cramps, you go home, you can't walk for a few days, and so you end up giving up on the whole experience. How many people sign up to gym memberships and end up throwing it away? And that's why gyms ensure that you pay the fee in advance, right? If it's an annual membership, you pay the whole thing because they know that 2 or 3 sessions down the line, you're not going to come anymore, right? That's why people buy the treadmills and the other equipment and they bring it home, and before you know it, the treadmill is just another thing to hang your clothes on, right? Instead of something to help you exercise. The reason for that is because you put too much pressure and you crack in the process. Like I said, you overload the system. You're not supposed to do that. So the Imam says, pick something small. Start with something moderate. For instance, pray your salat, right? If you find yourself struggling, but you come to these gatherings, you come to these majalis, and you're motivated to be a better person, you're motivated to walk in the footsteps of Imam al-Hussein and his children and his companions, fine. Start with something small. The focus on the essential items. Focus on your priorities. Don't lose sight of the priorities. This is crucial. This isn't something, by the way, for me to judge. It's for you to choose, for you to think about, to contemplate, and to come up with a plan. So the Imam says, start with something small. I'd say, pray your salat every day. Don't miss a single one. Then, when you get the hang of that, then start praying on time every day. When you get the hang of that, and the thing about religiosity, by the way, is that the more you show commitment to Allah, the more He helps you out. The more you show Him that you're serious about this, that you're in it because you mean it, the more He's going to give you not only the motivation, but also He's going to align the right set of circumstances so that you could be a better person, so that you could resist that sin that you've been struggling with for a long time. Suddenly, things in the universe begin to align in your favor. But you have to show God that you're serious. You have to prove to Him that you're worthy of His attention. Right? And that's not hard to do. Like I said, start baby steps. Baby steps. So, once you get the hang of praying on time every time, then start reciting Tasbihat Fatimat al-Zahra after each prayer. You could go, again, overload the system and pray 20 raka'at that are recommended in addition to the 17 that are obligatory. You could start doing Salat al-Layl tonight. Right? But the problem is, like I said, if you put too much pressure, you're going to crack. And you're going to do Salat al-Layl for like a night, 2 nights, 3 nights, but eventually you're going to feel this is too much. You can't do it, and so you give up. And when you give up on that habit, you tend to give up on more than just that habit. You give up on even the essential items. Right? So again, many traditions we talk about this. For instance, there's a hadith where Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says that I was performing tawaf around the Kaaba. Now, when you're in the vicinity of the Kaaba, there are 3 things that are highly recommended for you to perform. Number 1, and the single most rewarding act, is to circumambulate around the Kaaba. So to do the tawaf is by far the best thing you can do when you're in Masjid al-Haram. Second, and lower in rank to that, is for you to sit down and recite the Quran or perform salah. Right? That's also highly recommended, not as much as tawaf. And number 3, we have traditions that say that when you're there and you can't be bothered to do tawaf, you've done too much tawaf, or you've done too many raka'at and you're too tired, just sit down, sit still, and stare at the majestic beauty of the Kaaba. You are rewarded for simply looking at it. And that comes third after those 2 great acts of worship. So Imam Sadiq says that as I was doing tawaf, I overloaded the system. I was putting too much pressure on myself. I was becoming too hard on myself. So my father, Imam al-Baqir, came, he put his hands gently on my shoulder, and he said to me, son, Bunayya Ja'far, what is this that you're doing to yourself? You're overburdening yourself. You're putting too much pressure on yourself. Don't do this. Why? Listen to this. The Imam says, لِأَنَّ اللَّهَ إِذَا أَحَبَّ عَبْدًا قَبِلَ مِنْهُ بِالْيَسِيرِ. Because if Allah loves someone, He will accept what little He has to offer. Because let's face it, you and I can never show enough gratitude to Allah. We can never even thank Him for a single one of His favors, can we? So really, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. Now, if you can bring the quality up to the highest level, to the maximum level, then increase quantity. But before that, do not be too hard on yourself. Another hadith says, إِنَّ هَذَا الدِّينَ مَتِينٌ. It's a prophetic tradition where the Prophet says that this religion is a solid and heavy system. It's heavy. It can be difficult. If you're going to absorb it all, if you want to gobble up Islam, sometimes converts have a tendency where they embrace this religion and they want to know everything there is to know about it within a week or less, right? where they say this guy went to the Hawza in Najaf, and obviously he was someone who wanted to learn more about his faith, but at the same time, he had other commitments and other priorities. So he goes to the Hawza, and he goes to enroll in the Islamic seminary. So he says, I'm here to learn and to eventually become a mujtahid, so someone who rivals the rank of a marja, even if it takes me up to 3 months. I don't have a problem. I've worked out my schedule, so that if I have to spend 3 months, that's fine. I'm willing to make that sacrifice. And so sometimes people come into this faith, whether it be as, within the process of conversion, or because they've been so distanced from religion, and then they come to Muharram, they attend the gatherings of the majalis, and suddenly they want to become hyper-religious. They want to become uber-spiritual. And which is fine, to be ambitious, and that's great, but again, if you're trying to gobble up this very solid, this heavy religion of Islam all at once, you'll choke. You'll choke. There's no ifs or buts about it. So what it is, essentially, what I'm trying to say is that it's a process. You have to start taking one step at a time, applying what you already know, because that becomes a stepping stone for you to learn even more, right? The Commander of the Faithful says in a beautiful hadith, he says, اقتصاد في طاعة. Iqtisad means economy. In other words, a little bit of something, right? To economize, to practice an economical approach to life means to, have less of everything, right? To make do with whatever you can have, right? Economy class on airplanes is called economy class because it's nothing like business or first, right? So the Imam says, اقتصاد في طاعة خير من اجتهاد في بدعة. So doing a little bit of a good thing is better than doing a lot of an innovation. So a lot of these violent extremists, a lot of these, ISIS scums, right? The reason they turn to that sort of lifestyle, and let's not forget, some of the highest ranking leaders of this vicious, satanic, demonic, maniacal organization are people as young as 26 years of age. Did you know that? Right? So Ash-Shishani, I think his name is Abu Umar Ash-Shishani, who's the right-hand man of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he was born in 1986. Right? And the reason he became so close and he became a member of the inner echelon of the leadership of ISIS is because he's so smart. He's a military mastermind, they say. Right? Which kind of makes you think. If a 26-year-old guy can reach that rank that is so high and can wreak havoc across the globe and can do so much evil, then why can't our youth, who are in the same age, do equally good things to counteract all the evil that these guys are doing? What that means is we can do this, brothers and sisters. We can do a lot of good in this world that becomes, so big that it encapsulates the entire earth, just like ISIS is doing, except in its evil form, an evil version. So the Imam says that if you take a small thing that is good, it is much better than doing a lot, but doing what is essentially an innovation in religion. Thinking that you're doing the right thing by killing innocent civilians, by killing human beings who people are, they kill Muslims. Imagine, how can you justify that? And I've actually followed ISIS literature. I've read some of the stuff that they come out with, some of the apologetic ideas that they produce. And I am yet to find a single justification from the life of the Prophet or the Holy Quran to explain how they could get themselves to murder Muslims. I mean, non-Muslims, they could probably come up with some convoluted but deviated justification. But Muslims, how could you justify that? Blowing yourself inside a mosque, how could you justify that? I am yet to find a single one. Do you know what they do, by the way? They can't cite a verse from the Quran. They cannot get a story from the life of the Prophet and use it as basis for their actions. Do you know what they do? They skip the Quran, they skip the Prophet, they go to the successors, the so-called righteous leaders of the Muslim Ummah. So they had to refer to their lives before they could come up with any form of justification, no matter how wrong or evil or deviant. The point here is, the Imam then says, he says, وَتَعَلَّمُ مِمَّنْ عَلِمَ فَعَمِلُ. How do you create moderation? How do you create balance in your life? The Imam says, learn from those who are learned and who apply their knowledge. It's something that might seem a little obvious, right? Who do you learn from? You learn from those who know. But the Imam is more specific. The Imam says, learn from those who are learned, who are knowledgeable, but there's another component that you have to add. They also apply their knowledge before they impart it onto others. Now what does that mean? It means that if you see somebody, these days, mashallah, we have no lack of so-called scholars who are essentially Facebook scholars, right? They're online personalities, don't really have any credentials to boast about, don't really have any solid qualifications behind them. And by qualifications, I mean traditional Islamic education in the Islamic seminary, house education. There's not much in the way of those kinds of credentials, but suddenly they become role models. Suddenly they announce they develop a following, and they begin to preach, and they begin to develop a school for themselves, right? The Imam says that you have to be careful who you learn from. You have to get your knowledge from people who are, number one, knowledgeable. They have the credentials, they have the qualifications. And number two, they're the first to apply that knowledge. Essentially, we're talking about people who are in the same rank as our Maraja. If you ask your Marja, your qualified Marja, as to how you should conduct yourself, how you should lead your life, how you should organize and arrange the different components of your life, how do you create balance, how do you create moderation, I'm sure they would have a very good idea to present to you, right? So follow those who know and apply their knowledge. Moving on, Imam Sadiq says, I'll complete this section with this hadith. The Imam says, لا تكرهوا على أنفسكم العبادة. Don't turn acts of worship by overdoing them, by overburdening the system, by crashing the system. Don't turn acts of worship into something that you resent and despise and hate. Don't do it to yourself, and do not do it to people around you, your friends, your family, your children. We should be endearing acts of worship to our children. We should be showing them that time for salah is a time for serenity and tranquility. It's a time where you address God. It's a time for you to make that connection with the divine. Let's not turn it into some kind of a nightmare where every time they hear the adhan, they gasp as though something terrible is going to happen. Moderation is key. Balance. So that's condition number one. Condition number two is for us to be persistent, right? So it's a difficult thing to balance. To be moderate on the one hand, but to be persistent on the other. What do I mean by that? You see, we have many manifestations of Satan that can exhibit in our everyday lives. But one of them is that you'll find people who decide to change their lives for the better, right? Like most of us here. People who decide, make a conscious decision, a solemn vow to be better people today than they were yesterday. As soon as you make that commitment, you immediately appear on Satan's radar. What does that mean? It means that people who are deviant, people who are lost, Satan doesn't have anything to do with them, right? As far as Satan is concerned, they're a done deal. There's not much that he needs to do to bring them closer to his camp because they're already there. They're coming to him voluntarily. It's when people like us, people like ourselves, who decide to be better is when the shaitan makes it his number one priority to bring you down. Someone comes to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, listen to this beautiful hadith. He says to him, Ya Rasulullah, what's wrong with your followers? Why is it that your followers seem to suffer from more sins and transgressions and wrongdoing than the average person? The Imam said, let me ask you a question. If a thief wants to rob a house, would he pick the house with the goodies or would he pick the house that's got nothing in it? Obviously, you pick the house that's got things you can steal, precious items you can take, right? If the house is empty, the thief couldn't be bothered with it, the robber couldn't be bothered with it. So the Imam says that we have better than other people, we have more than other people by virtue of our love towards the ignorant. You already have so much that shaitan wants to take away from you. You already have that. You have the love of Imam Hussein, you have the love of the Ahlul Bayt. And so he's going to make it his number one mission to try and knock you down. But what I'm trying to say, the second condition of embarking on the ark of salvation of Imam Hussein is that you must be persistent. You can't just give up because you fell down, right? That's my whole point. I'm not saying that you have the love of the Ahlul Bayt, you've got nothing to worry about. It's the exact opposite. I'm saying that you have a lot to be worried about. You have to be vigilant. But if you do fall, and let's face it, a lot of us end up falling at one point or another, get right back up. Don't worry. Just because you fell down, just because you got knocked out, just because you copped a punch, doesn't mean that you're not cut out for this. I remember there was a young man who came and said, Sayyid, I'm trying to be a better person. I'm trying to walk in the footsteps of the companions of Abu Abdullah Hussein. And so as a part of that, I decided last night to wake up for Salat al-Fajr just before Fajr. Right? Most people barely catch the last few minutes of the sun before it rises. Right? But this guy, he said, I'm praying Salat al-Fajr consistently, alhamdulillah, but I want to do even better. I want to challenge myself. So what did he do? He said, I want to wake up just before Fajr so I can catch at least 2 raka'at of Salatul Layl. By the way, traditions tell us that if you can't perform all the 11 raka'at, even praying 1 raka'ah of Salatul Layl with the intention of Salatul Layl suffices. Allah gives you the rewards, right? It's all about the intention. So he said, I decided to wake up just before Salatul Fajr because that's the time for Salatul Layl. That day, I missed Salatul Fajr completely. I didn't even wake up for Fajr. So he goes to me, I'm not cut out for this. I can't do this. I know I can't. If I miss Salat al-Fajr, how could I ever think about praying Salat al-Fajr? I said to him, no, you're wrong. You see, when a boxer signs the contract and decides to go for the big match, he's got to be ready to cop a few punches, right? He can't expect to defeat his opponent with a knockout in the first round. It doesn't work that way, baby. That's not how life works. You have to be ready. I don't know why I'm sounding like a boxer's manager, but anyway. That's not how life works. The way it works is, if you want to stay safe, you stay back at home, right? You just stay in your bedroom and nothing's going to happen to you, right? But you won't grow. You won't flourish. If you want to reach those peaks of spiritual perfection, if you want to get to the point where you begin to understand what motivated the companions of Imam Hussein, if you want to get to the point where you begin to comprehend how a 14-year-old says to his uncle, Al-Mawtu fika ahla min al-asam. If you want to reach that level, then you have to put yourself out there. You have to be ready to fight the big match. Now, if you do that, you're going to get a few punches. There's no doubt about that. But if you fall down, what you need to do is get right back up. Because what that means, and I said this to the young man who was trying to pray Salat al-Fajr, I said to him, the fact that you missed Salat al-Fajr today means that the shaitan is giving you his best shot. And the fact that shaitan is giving you his best shot means that you're on the right track. It means that you're doing something right, or at least you're trying to do something right. So keep on at it. Don't give up just yet. Don't throw in the towel, as they say. Be persistent. Keep doing it. Now, let me just mention one point here, which I think might be relevant to some of us. You know, like I said, being persistent is important, but sometimes you're reading dua, right? And then you find yourself, suddenly, without even thinking about it, flipping through the pages to see how much more is left, right? When that happens, it's probably time to call it a day, right? Just go to bed, sleep. You know, we talked about moderation just a little bit. Do not overburden yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. Imam Sadiq has a beautiful hadith. He says, La tukarribu. Don't, like I said before, he says, don't make matters of faith repulsive. Right? Al-Alemaan Al-Bahrani is a great scholar, a luminary of the Shia faith. He's got a book called Al-Tariq ila-Allah, The Path to Allah. And he says in that book that sometimes you can throw in the towel, you can abandon an act of worship, but be rewarded for abandoning that act of worship. How? He says you have to know how to tweak your intention. So you're reading dua, right? Dua Josh al-Kabir, for instance. Which, I mean, let's face it, we only read that like once a year. So it's worth putting a little extra pressure on ourselves to continue the dua. But, you know, let's say you're doing something and you feel a little bored, and that's what the shaitan does sometimes, right? He makes you yawn, and he makes you exhibit, you know, characteristics of lethargy and what have you. So he says, when you get to that point and you know that you're just getting bored, right? He says, here's what you say to Allah. You say, oh Allah, I'm going to stop this right now with your permission. But not because I'm bored, not because I don't want to talk to you, but because I want to re-energize. I want to refuel. I want to take that nap so I can refuel, get more energy so that I can worship you even more and with greater vigor tomorrow. He says, you can be rewarded for doing that. Because the intention isn't to abandon an act of worship, no, it's to refuel and come back with greater energy the next day. So, now one tip that might help some of you is how do you distinguish between the shaitan trying to distract you and you genuinely becoming unable to continue? How do you distinguish between the two states? Well, there's a really good way that you could use. Sometimes you get tired, you start yawning, for instance. And when that happens, keep doing it for just a little bit more. Keep that act of worship for a few more minutes, right? If the motivation is restored, that means that was a fall fatigue, what I'd like to refer to as fall fatigue. It's not real fatigue, it's just a shaitan trying to distract, right? But if the motivation is not restored, it means you're genuinely tired, you better go to bed and do this tomorrow, right? Pick it up the next day. So, condition number 2, be persistent. Condition number 3. One of the manifestations of satanic influence in our lives is that after a while, when we've been doing good things, when we have been trying to live our lives in accordance with the rules set by the Holy Prophet and his immaculate progeny, after a while, shaitan whispers that you're now entitled to something, right? That it's okay to expect something in return for all the things that you've been doing. That sense of entitlement, brothers and sisters, is utterly dangerous. That's the moment that makes so many people fall from grace, when they feel somehow God owes them something in exchange for their acts of worship or their good deeds. Sometimes people come up to me and they ask me this question. It's a legitimate question. A lot of people have it, and I'm not trying to put anyone down, but I'm just trying to make you think from a different perspective. The question is this: why is it that many of our prayers are not answered? We make wishes, we have desires, we seek, we invoke God's name, and we pray for those things to be fulfilled, but nothing happens. You know what I would say in response? Obviously, there's a whole host of reasons why prayers are not, quote-unquote, answered, right? But you know what? Why should any of my prayers ever be answered? Why do I feel that because I've been praying for the past couple of years, or because I put on hijab at a certain point in my life, or because I've been to Hajj, or because I've been to Umrah, or because I've been to Ziyarah, now I have a sense of entitlement, and that somehow God owes me to give me something in return? Why? Why does God owe me anything at all? He owes me nothing. He's already given me a lot more than I deserve. So a lot of people will say, you know, I've been doing this good deed, I've been reciting this dua, or I've been doing that, how come I'm not seeing the other bit in my dreams? Or how come I'm not seeing a vision of my dead uncle, whatever the case may be? Well, don't seek the dream, my friend. Don't seek the vision. Seek Him. Seek God. I mean, isn't that enough? Isn't that enough? Imagine if you were told that you have the chance to have a private audience, a 5-minute one-on-one, just you and the marja that you follow. You get to speak to him about anything that's bothering you. You get to talk to him. You get to drink tea. Imagine that. Now, does it matter if at the end of that 5 minutes you get something in return? Does it? No, it doesn't. Because that's not the point. The point is you getting a 5-minute one-on-one with a manager. Someone who's got a lot of better things you could do than to sit with me. Imagine if you were told that you could get a 5-minute one-on-one session with the Imam of our time. Would it matter if the Imam gave you that brand new car that you've always craved, or he gave you that job that you want to get, your dream job? Would it matter? Does it matter if the Imam gives you anything material in return? No, it doesn't. Because you got to sit down with God's vicegerent and representative on earth. I think this is pretty obvious. It needs no explanation. Now, the mere fact that you and I have had the chance to speak to God, and in return, He says, I will give you my full, undivided attention, even though your attention is all over the place. Thanks to Tumblr, Facebook, and Twitter, our attention spans are like 30 seconds long now, right? We're all over the place when we're praying. God says, you know what? I'm giving you my full, undivided attention, even though you're all over the place. Does it matter then if we pray to Him and He doesn't give us what we want? Does it? Listen to this song. إلهي أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك فاسمع يا سميع منحتي Which dua is this one? We all know it's that thing which gives the month of Ramadan that beautiful fragrance. The Imam says, oh Allah, you have given me permission to speak to you. And that in itself is more than I could ever wish for. You've let me address you. Let me put this into perspective. I told you, if you had the chance to sit with your marja or with the scholar that you so love and so passionately adore, right? I told you about the Imam of our time. God is the creator of the infinite universe. Allah is the one who brought everything into existence from absolutely nothing. So the mere fact that He has given you and I permission to speak His name is more than anything we could ever ask for. It's the highest honor. It's the most sublime privilege, isn't it? Imam Zayn al-Abidin says in one of the whispered prayers, by the way, brothers and sisters, recite the whispered prayers. Just burn it on a CD, put it in your car. When you're driving to work in the morning, or you're on the train, put it on your phone. Listen to one of the whispered prayers of Imam Zayn al-Abidin in his immaculate work, As-Sahih As-Sajjad. Listen to one of them each day. It takes about 5 minutes, literally. In one of those whispered prayers called Munajat al-Dhakirin, Imam Zayn al-Abidin says the following. He says, Ilahi lawla al-wajibu min ita'ati awamirik lanazzahtu ismaka an dhikri wa min a'zami ni'amika alayna not given me permission, had it not been for the fact that you have made it obligatory upon me to address you, to speak to you, I would have exalted you from your name ever touching my tongue. Who am I to ever mention the name of God? Isn't it by His infinite grace and mercy and generosity that He's even let us do that? Let alone speak to Him? Let alone ask Him, let alone invoke Him. And then some naggy person like myself comes along and says, why is it that God doesn't answer my prayers? By the way, on that point, I want to mention something before I wrap up. God never leaves a prayer unanswered. Never. There's not a single prayer. If you pray to Him with sincerity, your prayers are always answered. But the answer might come in three different forms. Listen carefully. Either Allah will say, absolutely, I'll give you what you want. Or He'll say, now is not the right time. Wait a little bit, I'll give this to you, but now is not good for you. Or, option number 3 is He'll say, I've got a better idea. You want this? I'll give you something even better than that. This, by the way, is extrapolated from the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt. That not a single dua is ever rejected. Not a single one. Another hadith says that oftentimes when you pray to Allah for something, and you feel as though your dua has been rejected, your supplication has not been answered, but instead of you getting what you are asking, Allah allows you to survive a calamity that would have reached you had it not been for that dua. So because of that dua, you take out an insurance policy from Allah. And a lot of people are like, I wanted this, but I didn't get it. But you got something else which you don't even know about. You were saved from a car accident. You were saved from a bad neighbor who could have tormented you for a long time. You were saved from a bad deal. But we don't even know these things. We don't even notice them. But Allah does them out of His infinite grace because we invoked His name and because we prayed to Him. So, I wrap up with this. Brothers and sisters, let's not have any sense of entitlement. Let's not have any expectations from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how do you pray to Him? Right? If you pray as though He owes you something, it's like a little kid, right? I'm sure you've seen examples of this. A child who wants something from his parents, so he asks for it, they ignore him, then he starts to, act up a little bit, and then he starts to scream, and then he starts to pinch his parents. Now, what do the parents do? Any reasonable parents, what do? They'll never give him what he's asking. Why? Because he will learn, and children are very fast learners, we don't know that. He will learn, or she, that anytime he wants something, all he has to do is act up a little bit, and the parents will be at his service. So, reasonable, smart parents, people who have a sense of good parenting, they'll say, you know what, just because you've been acting up, we're not going to give it to you. Calm down and ask for us politely, say please, before we give you what you want, right? That's how it works with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not because He wants to punish us, but because He wants to discipline us. It's about us learning and flourishing and growing and becoming better, more appreciative people. And so, if we start acting up, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will either not give you what you're asking, or, and this is even more dangerous, is He will give it to you, but He will take away His blessings and turn that blessing into a curse, so that it distances you further and further away from Him. So how do you pray to Him? Only when you recognize your utter poverty. Only when you begin to appreciate your truly destitute nature, your infinite need for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you are in that mindset, only then will Allah answer your prayers as you make them. Don't have any sense of expectation or entitlement, because God owes you absolutely nothing. I'm saying this bluntly because that's the truth. Look at the companions of Imam Hussein. Look at Zuhayr ibn al-Qayyim. Inshallah, the companions have a night dedicated to them. But on this note, I just want to take you to a whole other realm, a whole other reality, where people had reached their absolute perfection. Zuhayr ibn al-Qayyim, when Imam Hussein on the Eid al-Ashura delivered a sermon and told his companions to leave him. And the Imam, by the way, that wasn't a drill, he wasn't playing in tricks. He really wanted anyone who had any doubts to just pack up and leave. Anyone, even those who didn't have doubts, the Imam began telling them that, you have kids, you have a family, you have this, you have that. Leave me, go. So the Imam wasn't just trying to test them, he genuinely didn't want them to die for him. Allah. Look at the compassion of Abdullah. He says to them that these people want me. Once they get a hold of me, once they kill me, they have no business with you. So just leave me. Use the darkness of the night and leave and go back to your families. So each one of the companions stands up, delivers a speech that is so powerful, that is so electrifying, that I swear to God, every time I hear the words that they uttered on that day, it sends shivers down my spine. And it makes me, one more time, say to Allah, oh Allah, could I ever reach that level? Could I ever get that sense of conviction, belief, that I have absolutely no doubts anymore? So each one says something, then Zuhayr ibn al-Qayyim stands up. Zuhayr ibn al-Qayyim says, Ya Aba Abdullah, إذا كانت هذه الدنيا باقية لا زوال لها. If this world was eternal, and there was no end to life on this world, and the only way to end this life, in other words, there was no hereafter, all there was this life, the only way to end it was to die, I would rather die with you than live for all eternity. That's my position, Ya Allah. Do what you will, but I'm sticking with you. I'm staying with you no matter what happens. Even if there was no paradise. Remember last night we talked about this. The love you have towards Abu Abdullah Hussein, all of us, alhamdulillah, we've been blessed by having at least the minimum of this kind of certainty. The love you have towards the Imam isn't tied to your greed for paradise or your fear of the inferno. When your heart breaks, you're not thinking how much you'll be rewarded for this. You're thinking, I am crying for the travesty of justice to which Abu Abdullah Hussein was subjected to. So it is pure in that sense. You love Hussein for his sake, for nothing else. So that's one example. The other example is a man by the name of Sa'id ibn Muhammad al-Hanafi. His name might not be very familiar, but I'm sure you've heard his story. Sa'id al-Hanafi is the one who said to Abu Abdullah Hussein, now you want to pray at Salat al-Dhuhr time, you should stand up and pray. Lead the other companions in congregation. I will stand and protect you as you perform Salah. Allahu Akbar. He stands, listen to this carefully. He stands in front of the Imam. Imam Hussein on the day of Ashura performed what we call Salatul Khawf. When you are in a state of fear for your life, when you're in the middle of the battlefield, right? Salah becomes qasr. So even if you're staying there, Salat al-Dhuhr, for instance, is 4 rak'ahs, it's 4 cycles, but in the state of fear, it's cut in half. So Abu Abdullah Hussein has time to pray Salat al-Khawf for 2 rak'ahs. This man stands in front of him. Historians say that as he stood in front of the Imam, shielding the Imam from the onslaught of the enemy, كان يلي السيوف والرماح والسهام بوجهه ونحره. He would block the arrows that were raining down at Abu Abdullah Hussein with what? With his face and his chest. Now, why would he use his face to block the arrows? Why not just use a shield? Do you know why? Look at the sincerity of this man. Look at the greatness of the companions of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Because he recognizes that as the arrows are approaching, as they are raining at the location where Imam al-Hussein is praying, you can't take any chances. And so he has to watch every arrow with his eye. And because he's trying to control the direction of the arrows, he's trying to observe where they're headed, the closest thing he could use to those arrows to block them is his face. As soon as Abu Abdullah al-Hussein finishes the salah, he holds out just long enough for the Imam to pray 2 rak'at. When the Imam finishes, he falls to the ground. The hadith says Imam al-Hussein approached him. He went to this great companion of his. He held his head, put it in his lap. He opened his eyes. He saw the luminous face of Hussein. What did he say to the Imam? No expectation, no sense of entitlement. He looks up and he says to him, Ya Mawla, Ya Aba Abdullah, awafayt, was I loyal to you? In other words, all I had was this body and this soul, and I am putting these on my hands, offering them to you as a gift. I am sorry, O Aba Abdullah, I've got nothing else to give you. He's apologizing to the Imam even though he's been using his face and his chest and his neck to block those arrows. Why is he apologizing? I think he's apologizing for 2 reasons. He's saying sorry, number 1, because he says, Ya Aba Abdullah, I wish I could have let you pray Salat al-Asr. Did you know Imam al-Hussein, he was not allowed because of the enemy's onslaught to pray Salat al-Asr on the day of Ashura. He only prayed Salat al-Dhuhr. So Ya Aba Abdullah, I'm sorry I couldn't do more for you. All I have is this blood and I'm shedding it for you, but I have nothing else to give you. That's one reason. The other reason he's apologizing, in my view, is that when the Imam came, as I said, he placed his head and he put it in his lap. In other words, he's saying, Ya Aba Abdullah, you are here now taking my head and placing it in your lap, but within an hour or so, you will be resting on the sands of Karbala, and there will be no one to hold your head and to comfort you and to put your head into his lap. Ya Aba Abdullah, at that moment, the Imam stands up. You will be all alone. You will be abandoned, and you will cry out, Ala min nasir yansuruna. Is there no one to help us? But the Imam isn't asking for help for himself, because he says in the next statement, he says, Ala minna min yadummu an hadam Rasulillah. Is there no one to safeguard the women of Rasulullah, to defend and protect Zainab, Sakina, Ruqayyah, the women of Rasulullah? Is there no one to defend Ruqayyah? Allahu Akbar. I didn't want to mention this musibah tonight, but you know what? You mentioned Ruqayyah's name and you can't help but to see your heart break. Ruqayyah, the 3-year-old daughter of Aba Abdullah. Anyone who has a 3-year-old understands this. The attachment she has to her father, and what a father she had. She would hear her father say, Allah min nasir yansuruni. Imagine what that does to your little girl. And she even heard her father scream, وَحَقْجَتِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أَنَا عَطْشَانٌ. My grandfather, the messenger, I'm thirsty. Ruqayyah hears this, and as painful as it is, but at least she can hear the voice of her father. You know, one day I was at home, I'm preparing a lecture. I also have a 3-year-old, my son. He came to me as I was walking in the hallway, looking at my notes. He came to me, he said, Father, what are you saying? I said, I'm preparing a lecture, I'm reading a musibah of Abu Abdullah. So he says to me, why are you walking? I'll walk with you. Wherever you go, I'll go. Then I went after a while, I sat down, he came to me. He says, Daddy, wherever you go, I go. If you walk, I walk. If you sit, I sit. Now imagine the 3-year-old Ruqayyah العلي العظيم إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. إلهنا وسيدنا ومولانا إنا نسألك وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله 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 بحق فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها عجل اللهم فرج إمام زماننا. اللهم بحق الحسين اشف صدر الحسين بظهور الحجة. اللهم واجعلنا من أصحابه وأعوانه. Oh Allah, give us the honor of following in the footsteps of Aba Abdullah. ربنا إلهنا سيدنا ومولانا. Make the heart of Aba Abdullah Hussein pleased with us. ربنا إلهنا وسيدنا. Hasten the reappearance of our master, the one who restores justice for the murder of Aba Abdullah Hussein. Oh Allah, protect our ulama, our scholars, our leaders, our maraja. Help them fulfill the mission that they have. Oh Allah, protect and safeguard the sanctuaries of Ahlul Bayt, the mausoleums, the shrines of the Imams. Protect them from the attacks of our enemies. Oh Allah, give us victory over those terrorists. برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والشهداء والصالحين نهدي ثواب مجلسنا هذا وثواب سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.
يا حسين يا شهيد يا حسين يا حسين يا شهيد يا حسين. Brothers, please stand up, come towards the front. يا حسين يا شهيد يا حسين. Raise your hands. يا حسين يا شهيد يا حسين. Brothers and sisters, يا حسين. قول يا إمام. يا شهيد يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا شهيد يا حسين يا حسين يا شهيد يا حسين. قول يا حسين يا شهيد يا حسين. ما شاء الله. يا حسين يا شهيد يا حسين. نحن كما قال الكفي ولمن معين والله لو قطعتم يساري واليمين ليرهام أبدا شيعتي عن ديني وعن إمام صادق بالحق واليقين. صادقين في الفداء صادقين. يا حسين يا شهيد يا حسين. Everyone, يا حسين يا شهيد يا حسين يا حسين
يا شهيد يا
حسين يا حسين يا شهيد يا حسين يا حسين
يا شهيد يا حسين.
إن كان دين أحمد يستقيم بقتلي به نحن ودمي كما فديت طفلي. إني شهيد كربلاء وأنسبوه مهلي. لا تخضعوا لظالم وقاتلوا لأجلي. ثائرين إن ختاك ثائرين شيعتي لو شربتم الضمائر فاذكروني كما لكم جرى الدم في كربلاء عيوني فجاهدوا عن كل من يقاتلوني على فهل من ناصر ناديت فانصروني قالي نحذف ذاك النادمين يا حسين يا شهيد يا
Your neighbors, the sick, the people all overseas who are in poverty, who are in desperate need, who are feeling the suffocation of life, who are in agony and pain and torture. Remember them in your dua, and also remember your own selves and your own families who might be going through their own struggles. And remember our brothers and sisters at the moment who are going through the HSC exams and the uni exams. Remember everyone who would appreciate you remembering them, and call 5 times the beautiful ayah in the Quran. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Al-Modaressi yujibu al-Mudarra idha da'a. Everyone. برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Brothers and sisters, before your salawat, please take your seat. just a few moments while the MC closes the program. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Jazakallah Sayyid Mahdi for that beautiful majlis. We shall walk out of this hall with many new things learned. And Jazakallah Brother Hamid for that beautiful Latmiya. Please recite the salawat for their well-beings.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Thank you everyone for coming to tonight's program, and inshallah we'll see you here tomorrow night. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.